The system was quiet before the attack. It was the kind of quiet that humans had learned to enjoy after centuries of war on their own world. Earth had grown into a calm, careful civilization. It did not look for fights. It built things. It studied things. It watched the stars and waited to understand its place among them. Far out past Jupiter, on a small moon called Calix, a group of human miners and their families lived in a simple dome colony. There were less than 1,000 people there. They mined rare metals from the rock and ice and shipped them back toward Earth and Mars. It was not a rich colony. It was not an important one by galactic standards, but it was home to the people who lived there, and that was enough. The Vorlek hegemony did not see it that way. The Vorlek were an old species, proud and confident, with a long history of expansion. They had conquered dozens of systems, not always through war, but often through threats backed up by force. Their method was simple. They would arrive somewhere weak, make a demand, and if the demand was not met quickly enough, they would destroy something small to prove they were serious. It worked almost every time. Weaker species learned fast that resistance only made things worse. When Vorlek scouts found the human colony at Calix, they reported back that humanity was a new species, technologically behind, with no real fleet presence this far from their home world. To the Vorlek command, this looked like an easy lesson to teach. If they moved quickly and struck hard, they could claim the system, send a message to nearby species, and add another notch to their long history of dominance. A Vorlek fleet of 6 ships entered the system under a flag of diplomacy. Their commander, a hardened officer named Threl Vasek, sent a message to the colony administrator. The message was polite in its wording but clear in its meaning. The Vorlek wanted the mining rights to Calix, and they wanted them now. The colony had no real defense fleet. They had 3 small patrol ships, built for safety drills and asteroid tracking, not for war. The colony administrator, a woman named Elena Castillo, refused, not out of pride, but because she did not have the authority to give away a colony that belonged to all of humanity, not just to her. She asked for time to contact Earth's government and discuss terms properly. It was a reasonable request. It was also, to the Vorlek, a refusal. Commander Vasek did not wait for an answer from Earth. He believed that speed mattered more than patience. He gave an order that he had given many times before on many other worlds. It was the order for what the Vorlek called a demonstration strike. The idea was simple and cold. Destroy something visible. Make sure everyone is watching. Let fear do the rest of the work. The Vorlek ships opened fire on the colony's main habitat dome. It happened fast. The dome's defenses were never built to stop weapons like this. Within minutes, the dome cracked open, and the air that kept hundreds of people alive rushed out into the empty cold of space. Families who had been eating breakfast, children who had been getting ready for school, miners who had just finished their night shift, all of them were gone in moments. 341 people died. 62 of them were children. The 3 small patrol ships tried to fight back. They had no chance. They were destroyed within minutes, their crews killed instantly. The Vorlek fleet did not even slow down to acknowledge them. Commander Vasek ordered the attack recorded and broadcast. This was standard practice for the hegemony. A demonstration only works if people see it. The footage was sent out across nearby systems, shown to other young or weak species as a warning. It showed the dome breaking apart, the bodies floating in space, the silence afterward. The message attached to the footage was simple. This is what happens to those who refuse the Vorlek hegemony. Do not make the same mistake. The footage reached the Galactic Council within a day. The Council was a group of representatives from many species, meant to oversee disputes and prevent total chaos among the stars. They reviewed the attack the way they reviewed most Vorlek actions of this kind, with a tired kind of acceptance. One council member, a Terran diplomat named Sally Zoru, raised a brief objection, noting that the human colony had not been given proper time to respond before force was used. But the majority of the council agreed that this fell under what they called standard pacification procedure. It was an ugly term, but a familiar one. Many species had learned to look away from this kind of violence, as long as it was not happening to them. The official council record listed the event simply: minor border dispute resolved. Human casualties noted. No further action required. No one expected Earth to do anything but accept the loss and move on. After all, humanity was new to galactic affairs. They had no large fleet stationed beyond their own solar system. They had never fought a war against an alien species before. To most of the galaxy, humans were still an unknown quantity, more curiosity than threat. The footage of the attack reached Earth's government within hours. It was shown first to a small group of senior officials, then, after a short and difficult debate, released to the public. People needed to know what had happened. Hiding it would have been its own kind of betrayal. Across Earth, the reaction was not loud anger, not right away. It was something quieter and heavier. People watched the footage in silence. They saw the dome break apart. They saw the names of the dead listed afterward, ordinary names, names like their neighbors and coworkers. They saw the ages of the children who had died. In a private briefing room in Geneva, Earth's senior military commanders sat together and watched the same footage for the third time. No one spoke for a long while after it ended. Admiral Renata Soto, the highest-ranking officer present, finally broke the silence. "They didn't even wait for an answer," she said. "They didn't even try to negotiate." General Marcus Webb, sitting beside her, nodded slowly. "They didn't think they needed to. They thought we were too small to matter." Soto looked at the paused image on the screen, at the wreckage of the dome hanging silently in the dark of space. "Then we need to make sure they understand exactly how wrong that thought was." No formal statement was made to the Vorlek hegemony that day. No demand for justice was sent. No fleet was launched. To the outside galaxy, Earth appeared to do nothing at all. But inside Earth's command structure, something had already begun. Files were being opened. Old plans, written long ago during humanity's own history of brutal warfare, were being pulled from storage and studied again. Communication channels normally used for trade and diplomacy quietly shifted toward something else. It was not the silence of a defeated people. It was the silence of people who had decided, calmly and completely, exactly what they were going to do next. Far away, on a Vorlek command ship, Commander Vasek reviewed his own report on the attack and marked it as a success. The colony had surrendered the system without further resistance. The message had been sent and received by other species in the region. As far as he was concerned, the matter was closed. He had no idea that, 300 million kilometers away, on a quiet blue world that the rest of the galaxy still considered young and harmless, the people of Earth had already begun preparing an answer the Vorlek hegemony would never see coming. 3 days after the attack on Calyx, the rest of the galaxy had already moved on. The Vorlek hegemony continued its normal operations, expanding its influence in 2 more border systems, treating the destruction of the human colony as a closed matter. Other species watched, learned the lesson the Vorlek wanted them to learn, and quietly adjusted their own behavior to avoid the same fate. Earth, however, had not moved on. It had simply gone quiet in a way that looked, from the outside, like grief or weakness. In truth, it was neither. Inside a secure facility beneath the Geneva Command Center, Admiral Renata Soto stood in front of a large display showing the layout of known Vorlek territory. Around her sat a group of senior officers, intelligence analysts, and engineers. None of them had slept much in the past 3 days. All of them had watched the footage from Calyx more times than they wanted to admit. "We are not going to rush this," Soto said. "Rushing is what they expect if they expect anything from us at all. We are going to be exact." General Marcus Webb nodded. "Exact costs time." "Then we take the time," Soto said. "We do this once and we do it right." Humanity had fought wars before, brutal ones. Against itself. Those wars had ended generations ago, but the knowledge from them had never been thrown away. It had been stored, studied, and slowly improved upon during decades of peace. Tactics for finding hidden enemies, methods for striking without warning, ways of using small, fast, hard-to-detect forces against larger, slower ones. None of it had been built with aliens in mind. All of it was about to be tested against them for the first time. Engineers across Earth's shipyards began quietly altering production lines. Officially, the changes were listed as routine upgrades to mining drones and cargo escorts. In reality, those same drone frames were being fitted with stealth coatings, sensor jammers, and weapon systems normally reserved for Earth's most advanced research projects. The work was spread across many factories, in many countries, so no single facility showed a sudden spike in activity that might be noticed by anyone watching from outside. Intelligence teams, meanwhile, worked on a different problem. They needed to know exactly who had given the order to attack Calix, who had carried it out, and how the Vorlek military was structured. Human intelligence services had spent years quietly gathering information on neighboring species, partly out of caution, partly out of simple curiosity. That information was now pulled together and studied with new urgency. A young intelligence officer named Daniel Igor was given the task of mapping the Vorlek chain of command. He worked almost without rest, cross-referencing old trade records, intercepted communications, and reports from independent traders who had dealt with the Vorlek before. Slowly, a picture formed. Commander Threl Vasek, the 6 ships under his command, the officers who had given the final order to fire on the dome. "We have him," Igor told Soto, pointing to a profile on his screen. "Vasek isn't just some random commander. He's done this before. 3 other systems over the past 20 years. Different species, same method. Demonstration strikes. He's good at it. That's why they keep using him." Soto studied the file for a long moment. Then he won't expect anyone to come looking for him personally. He's used to being untouchable. "That's exactly what our analysts think too," Igor said. Soto allowed herself the smallest, coldest kind of smile. "Then that's exactly the mistake we're going to use." While Earth prepared in silence, a small number of outsiders began to notice that something unusual was happening. Independent traders who regularly passed through human space reported that cargo ships and patrol vessels were moving differently than before. Schedules changed. Routes shifted. Nothing alarming on its own, but enough to raise questions among those who paid close attention. One such trader was a Keth merchant named Oro Vantal, who had done business with humans for over a decade. Keth merchants were known across the galaxy for being cautious, practical, and very good at reading the signs of coming trouble. Oro had seen this pattern once before, decades ago, when a different species had quietly prepared for war after a similar provocation. Oro contacted a small allied colony near Vorlek territory, one that had a long-standing trade relationship with both humans and a handful of smaller species. He gave them a simple warning: move your most valuable cargo and your most vulnerable people somewhere safer, just in case. He did not say why. He did not need to. Those who knew how to read the quiet understood it well enough. The colony quietly began shifting its most important assets to safer locations, without making any public announcement. A few of its leaders reached out to other small, independent worlds with similar warnings. None of them knew exactly what was coming. All of them sensed that something was. Back on Earth, the planning continued. Soto's team built their strategy around 3 goals. First, cripple the Vorlek's ability to build and repair warships, so they could not easily strike again anywhere. Second, target their military communication network, so that their forces could not act together quickly once the response began. Third, find and remove the specific individuals responsible for the attack on Calix, not through random violence, but through deliberate and targeted action. This last point caused the most debate among Earth's leadership. Some argued that humanity should strike harder, broader, more permanently. Why stop at the people responsible, when an entire system could be made to suffer the same fate as Calix? Soto refused to allow that path. If we become exactly like them, then nothing we do here means anything, she said during one tense meeting. We are not doing this to prove we can be as cruel as the Vorlek. We are doing this to prove that cruelty has a price. There's a difference, even if some people here don't see it yet. General Webb backed her on this point firmly. If we burn whole systems for the actions of a handful of officers, the rest of the galaxy will see us as just another threat to be feared and avoided. If we strike with precision and explain exactly why, the rest of the galaxy might actually understand the lesson we're trying to teach. There's more long-term value in being feared for being right than feared for being ruthless. It was decided. The plan would be sharp, fast, and exact. No system would be destroyed. No innocent population would be targeted. The strike would be aimed entirely at military targets and the specific people responsible for ordering the deaths of 341 human civilians. As the final preparations were completed, a memorial service was held on Earth for the victims of Calix. Families gathered. Names were read aloud, one by one, all 341 of them. 62 of those names belonged to children. The ceremony was broadcast across Earth, watched by billions of people in heavy silence. Admiral Soto attended the ceremony, standing quietly near the back. When the names of the children were read, she did not look away, and she did not show any visible emotion. But those closest to her noticed her hands tighten slightly at her sides. After the ceremony ended, she returned to the command center without a word to the reporters waiting outside. There would be no public statements yet. No threats, no warnings sent to the Vorlek hegemony. The galaxy still believed that Earth had simply chosen to accept its loss quietly, the way so many smaller species had been forced to accept losses before. The Vorlek hegemony continued its expansion elsewhere, confident that the matter of Calix was finished. They had no idea that, in the quiet of Earth's command centers, a fleet was being prepared. Not a fleet meant for slow, grinding war. A fleet built for something faster, sharper, and far more final than anything the Vorlek had ever faced before. The calm would not last much longer. 3 weeks after the attack on Calix, Earth moved. There was no warning sent first. No public threat, no fleet gathering in plain sight for the galaxy to see. The first sign that anything had changed came when 3 major Vorlek shipyards, spread across 3 different systems, lost contact with their central command within the same hour. The attacks did not look like a traditional war. There was no large fleet of human warships sweeping in for one massive battle. Instead, small groups of stealth-coated drones, barely larger than old mining shuttles, appeared out of nowhere near each shipyard. They had been hiding in the debris fields and asteroid belts nearby for days, completely undetected by Vorlek sensors that had never been designed to look for something so quiet and so small. The drones struck the shipyard's power systems first, then their construction docks, disabling the ability to build or repair warships without destroying the orbital stations themselves or harming the workers living there. Within minutes, 3 of the hegemony's most important shipbuilding centers were left dark and useless, without a single major loss of life. At the same time, a separate group of human ships targeted the Vorlek's military communication relays, the satellites and stations that allowed their fleets to talk to each other across long distances. One by one, these relays went silent. Vorlek ships that had once been able to coordinate instantly now found themselves cut off from each other, forced to rely on slower, older methods of communication that left them dangerously out of sync. Commander Threl Vasek, the officer who had ordered the attack on Calix, was patrolling a quiet border system at the time, confident and unconcerned. He had heard nothing about any threat from Earth. As far as he knew, the matter of the human colony had been closed weeks ago. His first warning came when his communication officer reported that 2 of his escort ships had gone dark without any distress signal. Vasek ordered a full sensor sweep. Nothing showed up. No enemy ships. No weapons fire. just silence where two warships used to be. "Run it again," Vasek ordered, frustration creeping into his voice. The second sweep found something, a faint shape barely visible moving along the edge of his fleet's formation. Before his crew could even identify what it was, his ship's systems suddenly failed, one after another. Weapons offline, engines offline, life support switched to emergency backup. The ship had not been destroyed, it had been very precisely disabled. A human voice came through on an open channel a moment later, calm and clear. "Commander Threll Vasek, you are being taken into custody for the killing of 341 civilians at the human colony of Calix, including 62 children. You will not be harmed if you do not resist." Vasek stared at the comm panel in disbelief. No Vorlek officer had ever been spoken to this way before, not by a species the hegemony considered young and unimportant. For a brief moment, he considered resisting. Then he looked at the readouts showing every system on his ship completely locked down, and he understood there was no point. He was taken aboard a small, fast human vessel, without a single shot fired. Across Vorlek territory, similar scenes played out. Officers who had taken part in or directly ordered the attack on Calix were identified, tracked, and either captured or, in a small number of cases where they chose to fight rather than surrender, killed in brief, one-sided engagements. Human forces made no effort to hide their reasoning. Every captured officer was told clearly and calmly exactly why they had been taken, and exactly what crime they were being held accountable for. Word of what was happening spread quickly through Vorlek military channels, then beyond them, to traders and travelers passing through the region. The reports were strange and hard to believe at first. A species barely a few decades into galactic contact, with no history of fighting wars beyond their own world, had somehow disabled 3 major shipyards, cut off military communications across half a dozen systems, and was now hunting down specific individuals with frightening precision, all without any large-scale battle or any attack on civilian populations. The Vorlek High Command, scrambling to understand what was happening, ordered a full counterattack, gathering what remained of their operational fleet to strike back at the human forces directly. It did not go as they expected. Without working shipyards to repair damage and without reliable communication between ships, the Vorlek counterattack fell apart almost as soon as it began. Fleets that should have moved together instead arrived at different times, unable to coordinate properly. Human forces, who had spent weeks studying exactly how the Vorlek military operated, anticipated each move and avoided direct confrontation whenever possible, preferring instead to disable ships rather than destroy them outright. In the rare cases where Vorlek crews chose to fight to the end rather than surrender, the engagements were short and one-sided. Human weapons and tactics, built from generations of hard-earned experience and quietly perfected over weeks of preparation, proved far more advanced than the Vorlek had assumed possible from a species so new to the wider galaxy. Within 3 weeks, the hegemony's ability to project military force in the region had been almost completely dismantled. No Vorlek homeworld had been touched. No civilian population had been harmed in the human strikes. The campaign had targeted exactly what it was meant to target: the ships, the systems, and the specific individuals responsible for the attack on Calix. The captured officers, including Commander Vasek, were brought before a hastily organized human tribunal, broadcast openly across as many galactic communication channels as Earth could reach. There were no theatrics, no displays of anger. Evidence was presented plainly. The footage from Calix was shown again, this time alongside intercepted Vorlek communications proving the attack had been a deliberate, planned demonstration strike rather than any kind of necessary defense. Vasek, standing before the tribunal, did not deny what had happened. He simply stated, almost calmly, that this was how the hegemony had always operated, and that he had only been following standard procedure. Standard procedure, the lead human judge repeated quietly, looking through the list of his previous victims. 3 other systems before Calyx, different species, same method. You did not make a mistake, Commander. You made a choice more than once. Today, you face the result of that choice. The trial concluded swiftly. Vasek and several of the other officers most directly responsible for ordering and carrying out the attack were sentenced to lengthy imprisonment under human custody. Their names and crimes recorded permanently and shared openly across galactic channels for any species to review. Throughout the entire campaign, Earth made no demand for new territory, no request for tribute, no claim over any Vorlek system or resource. When asked by a small group of independent observers what Earth hoped to gain from the conflict, the human representative gave a simple answer that would later be repeated across the galaxy in the weeks to come. "We don't want anything that belongs to them," she said. "We only wanted them to understand that what they did could never happen again, to us or to anyone else, without consequence." The Vorlek hegemony, once one of the more confident and aggressive powers in the region, now found itself with a crippled fleet, a damaged reputation, and a humiliating, very public defeat at the hands of a species they had assumed was too weak and too new to ever fight back. And far beyond the borders of the conflict, in the quiet halls of the Galactic Council, representatives from dozens of species were already calling for an emergency session, struggling to understand exactly what kind of species humanity truly was, and what it might mean for the rest of the galaxy now that the rest of the galaxy finally knew. The Galactic Council chamber was rarely full. Most sessions involved only a handful of representatives, dealing with small trade disputes or minor border disagreements between minor powers. This session was different. Every seat was filled. Extra observers stood along the walls. Word had spread quickly across the galaxy, and every species with any stake in the region wanted to understand what had just happened. At the center of the chamber stood the human delegation, led by Ambassador Mei Lin, a calm and careful diplomat who had spent years studying galactic politics before humanity had ever been invited to join the wider community of species. Beside her stood General Marcus Webb, present not to threaten anyone, but to answer any direct military questions the Council might raise. The session opened with Counselor Dren Hask, a senior representative from a species known for caution and careful neutrality. He addressed the chamber first, his voice steady but clearly troubled. 3 weeks ago, the Vorlek hegemony carried out what they call a demonstration strike against a human colony. Such actions, while we may personally find them distasteful, have long been treated by this council as an internal matter between stronger and weaker powers. It is, unfortunately, how galactic politics has worked for a very long time. He paused, looking around the chamber. What concerns this council today is not the original attack. It is the response. In 3 weeks, a species we believe to be technologically junior has crippled one of the region's most established military powers, captured its officers, and broadcast their trial to every corner of known space. We must ask ourselves what this means for the future, and whether this level of retaliation should be allowed to stand unanswered. A representative from the Dran Collective, a species known for their close ties to several larger expansionist powers, spoke next, his tone sharp with concern. "This is exactly the danger we should have expected from inviting an unknown species into galactic affairs too quickly," he said. "Today it was the Vorlek who suffered this response. Tomorrow, it could be any of us, for any perceived offense. If humanity is allowed to act with this level of force without consequence, we are setting a precedent that punishes provocation with disproportionate, unchecked violence." Ambassador Mei Lin waited until he had finished before responding, her voice calm but firm. "I would ask the representative to clarify what he means by disproportionate." 341 human civilians were killed in an unprovoked attack, including 62 children. In response, Earth targeted only military infrastructure and the specific individuals responsible for ordering that attack. Not a single Vorlek civilian was harmed. Not a single Vorlek world was invaded. If anything, our response was remarkably restrained, given what was done to us. A long silence followed her words. Several council members exchanged uncertain glances. Counselor Sally's Oru, the Terran diplomat who had raised the original objection to the Calix attack weeks earlier, finally spoke. I think what troubles many of us is not the restraint shown, but the precision. A species capable of disabling entire shipyards without harming workers, capable of identifying and capturing specific officers across multiple systems within weeks, is a species with capabilities far beyond what we understood humanity to possess. The question before this council is not whether Earth acted justly. By most reasonable standards, they did. The question is what this capability means for the balance of power going forward. General Webb stepped forward to answer this directly, his tone measured. I understand the concern, but I would point out that this capability was not built to threaten this council or any species represented here. It was built, over generations, mostly during conflicts among ourselves, long before we ever knew species like yours existed. We did not develop these methods to conquer the galaxy. We developed them surviving our own history. What you saw 3 weeks ago was that same capability, redirected for the first time against an external threat, used as precisely and carefully as we knew how. The drawn representative was not satisfied. And what happens the next time a smaller dispute arises? Will Earth respond with this same level of force over a lesser provocation? Mei Lin answered without hesitation. Earth has no interest in becoming a power that punishes minor disputes with overwhelming force. What happened at Calix was not a minor dispute. It was the deliberate killing of civilians as a calculated political message, a tactic the Vorlek hegemony has used at least 3 times before against other species, according to records we have shared with this council. Our response was proportional to that specific act and aimed only at correcting it. We are not interested in ruling anyone. We are interested in making sure that what happened to our people does not become an acceptable pattern for anyone else's people either. This last point caused a noticeable shift in the chamber. Several smaller, quieter delegations, species who rarely spoke during council sessions, began murmuring among themselves. These were species who had, at one point or another, suffered similar demonstration strikes from larger, more aggressive powers, and had simply been told by the council to accept it as the cost of being weak. A representative from one such species, a small, soft-spoken delegate from the Iveth cluster, rose to speak for the first time in the session's history. "If I may," she said quietly, drawing the attention of the chamber. "My people lost an entire mining settlement to a similar demonstration strike decades ago. We were told then that nothing could be done, that this was simply how stronger powers dealt with weaker ones. We accepted that because we had no other choice." She looked toward the human delegation. "I do not say this to encourage violence. I say this because, for the first time, I have seen a stronger power respond to such cruelty with consequence, rather than indifference. Whatever else this council decides today, I do not believe punishing Earth for that response sends the right message to the rest of us." Councillor Hask called for a brief recess to allow members time to consider the arguments presented. When the session resumed, the debate continued for several more hours, splitting the council roughly into 3 groups. One group, led largely by the drawn representative, continued to argue that Earth's capabilities posed a long-term risk that needed to be limited through formal council oversight or restriction, regardless of how justified this particular action had been. A second, more pragmatic group argued that punishing a proportional, restrained response to a documented atrocity would create a far more dangerous precedent than allowing it to stand. If Earth could be sanctioned for defending itself this carefully, what message would that send to any species facing similar threats in the future? The third and quietest group, made up mostly of smaller, more vulnerable species, said little during the formal debate, but their position became clear through small gestures, nods toward the human delegation, brief words of thanks exchanged after the session, quiet expressions of something the chamber had rarely seen directed toward a newly contacted species. Respect, mixed cautiously with relief. As the session neared its end, Counselor Hask addressed the human delegation directly. Ambassador Lin, General Webb, the Council will need time to deliberate fully before reaching any formal decision regarding sanctions or restrictions. I will say, candidly, that the events of these past weeks have changed how several members of this body view your species, in ways that go beyond strategy or policy. Mei Lin inclined her head respectfully. We understand the Council's caution, and we respect the seriousness with which this matter is being considered. Earth did not ask to be tested in this way. We did not seek conflict, and we do not seek to expand our influence through force. We simply ask that the same standard applied to Earth's response be applied equally to everyone else's actions going forward, including those who choose to act first. As the session adjourned for further deliberation, the chamber slowly emptied, but the conversations continued long into the following hours, spreading from the council chamber to trade stations, news networks, and quiet diplomatic channels across dozens of systems. For the first time since humanity's arrival on the galactic stage, the question being asked was no longer what humanity was capable of. It was what humanity had chosen to do with that capability, and what that choice now meant for everyone else watching closely from the shadows of larger, more dangerous powers. The Galactic Council took nearly 2 weeks to reach a final decision, far longer than usual for any single matter. In the end, after long debate and pressure from several different directions, the Council declined to impose any sanctions or restrictions on Earth. The official statement was carefully worded, balancing caution with reluctant respect. It read in part that the human response to the attack on Calix had been proportional, restrained, and directed solely at those responsible, and that punishing such a response would undermine the very principles of accountability the Council claims to uphold. It was not a warm statement. It was not an endorsement, but it was, in its own careful way, an acknowledgement that Earth had done nothing the Council could honestly call wrong. The Vorlek hegemony, meanwhile, found itself in a far weaker position than before. With its shipyards damaged and its fleet crippled, it could no longer maintain the same level of influence over its border systems. Several smaller worlds that had once depended on Vorlek protection, sometimes unwillingly, began quietly seeking new alliances elsewhere. A few approached Earth directly, asking cautiously whether humanity might be open to trade agreements or mutual defense arrangements. Earth's government considered each request carefully. There was no rush to expand, no eagerness to fill the gap the Vorlek had left behind. Ambassador Mei Lin, speaking to one such delegation from a small border world, summarized Earth's position simply. "We are not interested in becoming what the Vorlek were," she said. "We will trade fairly. We will defend those we agree to defend, but we will not demand loyalty through fear, and we will not punish anyone for choosing differently." This approach, quiet and consistent, did more to shape the galaxy's view of humanity than the military campaign itself ever could. Species that had spent years living under the shadow of larger, more aggressive powers began to see Earth as something unfamiliar but welcome, a power capable of real force, but not eager to use it carelessly. Commander Threll Vasek remained in human custody, serving the long sentence handed down by the tribunal. He was treated fairly, given proper conditions and basic respect, something that surprised him deeply at first. He had expected cruelty in return for cruelty. He found instead a kind of cold, steady decency that unsettled him more than open hostility ever could have. In a rare recorded conversation, made public sometime later as part of an ongoing historical review, Vasek asked the human officer overseeing his imprisonment why he was not being treated the way he had once treated others. The officer, a quiet man named Captain Louis Tran, answered simply, "Because what you did wasn't about strength. It was about cruelty, used carelessly, because you believed no one strong enough to stop you would ever care enough to try. We wanted to prove both parts of that wrong, that someone could care enough to respond and still choose not to become what you were." Back on Earth, life slowly returned to its usual rhythm, though the events at Calix were never forgotten. A permanent memorial was built on the rebuilt colony, listing all 341 names of those who had died, with a separate, smaller section honoring the 62 children among them. Every year on the anniversary of the attack, the names were read aloud again, broadcast quietly across Earth, and for the first time, picked up and respectfully acknowledged by a handful of other species who had come to see Calix as a turning point in galactic history, not just a human tragedy. Admiral Renata Soto, who had led the planning of Earth's response, attended every one of these ceremonies for the rest of her career. She rarely spoke publicly about the campaign itself, deflecting most questions with the same simple answer. "We didn't do anything special," she would say. "We just made sure that what happened to those people mattered enough to answer properly. I hope no one ever has to do what we did again. But I'm glad we were ready when it turned out someone did." Years later, historians studying the wider galaxy's political shifts would often point to the Calix incident, and Earth's response to it, as the moment the balance of power across that region of space began to quietly change. Several aggressive powers, having watched what happened to the Vorlek hegemony, grew noticeably more cautious in how they treated smaller, weaker species under their influence. Demonstration strikes, once common enough to be treated as routine by the Galactic Council, became far rarer, not because of any new law or policy, but because of a simple, uncomfortable question that now sat quietly in the back of every ambitious commander's mind. What if the next target turns out to be more than they appear? The Vorlek hegemony itself slowly rebuilt over the following years, but never regained the same level of dominance it once held. Some among its leadership saw this as humiliation. A few others, quietly and without much public acknowledgement, saw it as a kind of necessary correction, a reminder that strength without restraint eventually meets something it cannot easily overcome. As for Earth, it continued doing what it had always done best since stepping onto the galactic stage: building, trading, studying, and quietly preparing for whatever might come next, without seeking attention or admiration for doing so. Humanity did not become a galactic empire. It did not seek to rule over the species who came seeking alliances after the fall of Vorlek influence. It simply became something the wider galaxy had not expected from a species so new to the stars. A power that could be trusted to respond fairly, but never carelessly. On the rebuilt colony of Calix, on a quiet anniversary years after the attack, a young officer stood beside the memorial wall, reading through the long list of names carved into the stone. She had not been born yet when the attack happened, but she had grown up hearing the story, the way most people on Earth had. An older officer beside her, one who had served during the original campaign, noticed her studying the names quietly. "Do you ever wonder if it was worth it?" the younger officer asked. "All of it, the planning, the campaign, everything that followed." The older officer looked at the names for a long moment before answering. "We didn't do it to be feared," she said. "We did it so something like this would be harder to do again, to us or to anyone else. If that lesson holds, even for people who never know our names the way we know theirs, then yes, it was worth it." The young officer nodded slowly, looking back at the long list of names, 62 of them belonging to children who had never gotten the chance to grow up. Above them, the sky over Calix was calm and clear, the rebuilt dome standing strong against the quiet dark of space, a small reminder that even the deepest cruelty, answered carefully and firmly enough, could eventually give way to something steadier in its place. The galaxy moved on as it always did. But it moved differently now, more carefully, more aware that even the youngest among the stars could answer cruelty with consequence, without losing themselves in the process. And somewhere in the quiet halls of the Galactic Council, the record of Calyx remained, not as a warning against humanity, but as a reminder to everyone else of what could happen when cruelty finally met something it never expected to find. A species patient enough to wait, careful enough to plan, and steady enough to make sure the lesson